Hi, and thanks for joining us for this free YouTube version of our health and safety training course, which is also available in full with certificates over at safeti.com. If you find our content useful here in this format on YouTube, please hit that like button and leave us a comment if you like. Let us know what you found useful. By doing that, you'll help more people discover our channel here, and not only that, it'll encourage us to upload even more free resources just like this here on our YouTube channel. So thanks a million in advance for that. Okay, let's waste no more time. We're ready to get started with our health and safety training. Okay then, first of all, let's answer the question, what is COSHH? Well, the term COSHH relates to the UK-based regulations that deal with the control of substances hazardous to health, or COSHH for short. These guidelines demand that employers prevent or control workers' exposure to any substances that may cause harm to their health. If you're not in the UK, don't panic, this training will still be valuable to you. Many nations around the world now have very similar guidance or legislation in place that implies that the same or similar controls must be in place to prevent harm from hazardous substances. For instance, in Australia this is referred to as managing risk of hazardous chemicals. In the USA they refer to chemical hazards and toxic substances, whilst in Ireland their guidance refers to chemical agents and carcinogens. In general terms though, all of these are looking at similar workplace risks. A question for you now. When you think about hazardous substances or chemicals, what pops into your head? For many of us, our thoughts go to industrial toxic waste, highly hazardous materials, or even people in hazmat suits. And for each of us, our perception of chemicals and hazardous substances will be different due to our own experiences both in and outside the work environment. In reality, there's a very broad spectrum of hazardous substances that exist, and they come in many different forms. Let's take a look at some of them. First of all, liquids. We've already touched on liquids, and most people would think of liquids as their first go-to when it comes to thinking about chemicals and hazardous substances. There are many types of hazardous substances that are found in liquid form. For example, cleaning products, fuels, pesticides, processed chemicals, and even liquefied gases. The next common form that we come across are dusts. Dusts are tiny dry particles suspended in the air, and they can come from all sorts of different substances, including wood, concrete, bricks, glass, grains and flour. Just a quick reminder. It's really important to remember that dusts can be created by a number of very common work activities such as cutting, drilling, grinding and sanding, to name a few. Next up, we have a group of chemical forms that people often get confused, and that's okay. We're going to take a look at them individually and spot the differences between them so that you can recognize them. What are these different forms that I'm referring to? It's gases, vapors, mists and fumes. Let's look at them briefly. First of all, we have gases. Gases are made up of molecules in constant random motion, and they are usually invisible to the naked eye. In the commercial settings, we often have to deal with the additional risk that these gases are highly pressurized. Of course, there's a whole range of different types of gases, and the level of harm potential from them is a huge spectrum in itself. So it's very important to know exactly what types of gases or gas mixes that you're dealing with in the commercial environment before you use them. Next up, we have vapors. A vapor isn't quite a gas, but it's a substance in its gas phase that usually exists as a solid or liquid under ambient conditions. For example, water vapor is water in its gas phase. This happens during the process of evaporation, and it can occur across a range of atmospheric conditions. Potentially harmful vapors that we come across very often in industrial settings include those that would be classed as solvent vapors. They are released from things like adhesives or glues, paints and inks. The next one then are mists. A mist is really a tiny water droplet that is suspended in the air. You'll see mists when you're, for example, using a powered jet, trigger sprays on cleaning products, for example, or even when using hand dispensers to release a liquid. And then we have fumes. Fumes are a mixture of gases and fine particles that are created from heating a solid. For example, fumes are created when you're welding an object using a metal or soldering, for example. Of course, in these circumstances, we'll want to have strong and strict control measures around the extraction of these potentially harmful or carcinogenic fumes when you're performing that type of work. When we're considering the potential for harm, a multitude of factors needs to be taken into account. This includes things like the specific product and its characteristics, the quantity and form of the product, how they are going to be used, potential pathways and duration of exposure, and of course control measures that are needed to manage risk. Of course, not every substance or material that you're using in the workplace will fall under COSHH, but how do we recognise the ones that do? Let's find out. One of the easiest ways to find out if a material is indeed hazardous to health is to find out if a safety data sheet exists for the product. If a product has been deemed hazardous when it's been assessed using the Globally Harmonised System for Classification and Labelling, or GHS, then it should have an SDS. As you can see on screen, there are hazard classes that are denoted by pictograms. These represent a specific type of harm that can occur from a material or substance in accordance with the guidelines from the GHS. These are a good starting point, but there should be lots more useful information to back these up within our safety data sheets. One of the key aspects of managing hazardous substances, or COSHH, is understanding the level of risk that exists within your specific operation or activity. Performing a COSHH assessment is a fundamental part of that process. A COSHH assessment is a structured review of the hazardous properties of the substance or substances that you use within your workplace, looking at how they are used within your work practices, including any interactions between different hazardous substances themselves, and of course identifying any necessary control measures that are needed to prevent harm to health. You can keep your COSHH assessments as standalone documents, but it's often very useful to link them into existing risk assessments and/or work process documentation that already exists within your business. It really just depends on what way your business normally operates. In summary, at the end of your COSHH assessment, it should be very clear as to which hazardous substances you use within your workplace, how they should be used within that environment, and of course, what control measures should be in place to make sure no one comes to harm. I would be quite surprised if you didn't recognise this type of hazard symbol. They're so common across a lot of products nowadays, even in those that we use within our own households, on anything from toilet cleaners to dishwasher tablets and so on. But the big question here is, do you actually know what they mean? Okay, here are the main symbols that we see used to represent hazardous substances when we're using the GHS labelling system. The important part for us here is just to recognise that the presence of these symbols, or at least one of them, means that the product is hazardous to health and/or to the environment. We won't go into the full detail of each symbol in this short course, but let's take a quick look at a couple of the symbols that are classed as health hazards to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. Thanks again for visiting our channel. We really hope you found it valuable. Please hit that like button and do subscribe to the channel so we can let you know if we release new material. That really is a huge help for us. Not to forget, I will leave links to the full course version with certificates that's available at our website safeti.com, so you can use that for yourself, your team or your business, and we'll look forward to hearing your feedback on that. Until next time, take care.